Representing the Victoria Horse Alliance, Jordan Reichert is here to talk about their ongoing efforts to rescue horses from having to work alongside cars on Victoria's busy streets. Thank you for taking the time today, Jordan.
Thanks for having me on, Janine.
I guess it's cars and bicycles and trucks and people and all sorts of things, and the streets are getting busier, it seems like. And so who are the Victoria Horse Alliance, and what is your mission?
Yeah, so I started the Victoria Horse Alliance back in 2015 after the fifth federal election. And Victoria Horse Alliance operates as kind of a sub or just community group, grassroots group of the Animal Alliance of Canada, which is the organization I work for. And, so it's made up of many community members who get involved and, of course, participate in demonstrations and organize, go to council meetings and address council, send emails, promote petitions and such. However, I tend to take on the responsibility for most of the work that is done.
And so the purpose is to limit the amount of horses on the roads or raise awareness, or what's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, so our mandate is that it's not a safe or humane place for horses on city streets, and our goal is to have the industry phased out and banned in Victoria as soon as possible. We've been working on it for quite a few years now, of course, and there's been a few times, most recently last year, where the issue came to a head, sort of. It's the closest it's ever been to moving forward. However, still a long way to go, and the politics of it are and the optics of it are just extremely divisive in the community, and it, so there's a lot of opinions on both sides, and certainly our focus is to document everything, file complaints with the city bylaw enforcement or with the BCSPCA in terms of cruelty complaints, and to just basically hold the companies accountable for their conduct and for incidents that happen with the horses, and to make sure somebody is basically watching, because there's no public oversight of this industry from a municipal standpoint, provincial standpoint, or from even the SPCA, unless somebody reports on what's happening.
So it's another situation of sort of self-regulating
Absolutely.
itself, and yeah. So really, you're depending on the public then to document whatever they see. There was an interesting video I noticed on your website recently where the horse was putting its foot up on the curb. And
Mhm.
it was almost like, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do this anyways. And then it wasn't a Horse Alliance person, I don't think, was it, that took that video, or was it just a member of the public?
Yeah, it was somebody associated with the Victoria Horse Alliance that
Oh,
did send in the video, and but what it is that if you spend a few hours down at the horse carriages, you'll see something kind of concern. It could be small, or it could be major, but in terms of just the general practices and operation of the horse carriages, there are always things going on. And if nobody documents it, then they just don't exist. And so in the incident that took place, what you have is, basically a horse being playful, just kind of like how your cat or dog might be kind of playful by doing something that it knows probably annoys you, or they know annoys you, but at the same time, uh, you know, they're getting a response from you because of it, and so they keep doing it to get that response. And in this case, it appeared the driver became very frustrated and, just acted in what I would say was an aggressive or sort of intimidating manner to try to get the horse to stop. And then of course there was the piece where, kind of uncalled for, where they are walking back past the horse and they just pull the whip out, hit the horse, and put the whip back, which seemed completely unnecessary as well. a cruelty complaint was just filed with the SPCA, not because, I think there's going to be any sort of actual cruelty investigation or or charges or anything like that related to it, because it's just there's a very high threshold for any sort of charges or conviction to move forward from the Crown. But just to document it, just to make sure that they're aware that there are people who are going to hold them accountable for their actions. And the other piece is that if this was a dog, for example, that somebody was walking or working, and somebody treated a dog in this way, the response from the community and the backlash against that industry would be tremendous. And yet, because they are a large animal and a horse, it's basically just tolerated and seen as, and it's kind of brushed aside as well, like, who cares? So it's very unfortunate, but that's what it's all about, is just ensuring accountability of what is happening. And we've over the years we've documented numerous issues from um, people, drinking, acquiring alcohol and drinking in the back of carriage vehicles, to uh, issues of uh, driving related issues, or like drivers being on their cell phones, which while driving, which of course is not actually necessarily against the law, unlike for regular drivers or everybody else on the road, which it would be considered distracted driving, because there's no motor on a carriage vehicle. The Motor Vehicle Act doesn't necessarily apply to them the same way it does um, actual motor vehicles. So they're allowed to do things like that, even though the driver's oblivious to what's going on around them. They can still have this vulnerable animal in the middle of traffic while they're distracted. So issues like that come up, and even though there's nothing we can necessarily do about it, it does paint a picture of just kind of irresponsible business practices or inhumane treatment of the animals that needs to be documented.
Yeah, and regarding the horse that was putting its foot up on the
Mhm.
curb, sort of taunting the driver, it looked like. But one of the comments on the video suggested that the horse might have been injured in some way, it had a sore foot, and there was no evidence that the driver, was taking any sympathy in that regard. I thought, oh yeah, well that's a good point. That the horse, sometimes they'll try to get your attention
Mhm.
for things like that.
Well, they're also very bored often,
Yeah.
especially right now with the pandemic. They will often stand for extended periods of time, upwards of an hour or more, without moving. So just standing in the sun, in the hot pavement, and you know,
And with
they're
all their
they're
gear, like that's
yeah,
heavy gear, and the bit in their mouth I know is uncomfortable.
yeah,
And
yeah. And so they're just looking at ways to, kind of they act out because of those kind of situations. It could be related to, it could be a physiological reaction to stress, or um, to boredom, or it could be injury related. But unfortunately, unless the BCSBC investigates and gets a vet to look into these issues, there's very little that we can do.
mm. There was a video also on your site was showing horses down on the street that they'd fallen, I think back in May 2018. How often does that happen in Victoria that we may not know about?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to say all the times we don't, these things that haven't been documented, because there certainly are documented incidences, but we do see in general some kind of major incident with the horse carriages once a year. It may not necessarily be with them being on the ground, but it could be like a runaway horse, runaway carriage, um, property damage, injury, things like that. However, in the instance of 2018, yeah, what we know, because the video doesn't start until the horses are already on the ground, is that the trolley that the horses were pulling, where it was bumped from behind, The horses either, collapsed or laid down. It's unclear. The person who sent us the video said what they saw was the horses like fall to the ground. So, somewhere in between there, I guess. And then what happened was that the horses were not able to get up after a few attempts at getting up. They did eventually rise at the end of the video, as it shows. The carriage company said that they were fine. They went back to work soon after.
Oh,
Um,
they put them
but
back to work after that.
yeah, so immediately after the accident occurred, of course, the the media, because it was caught on video, or actually it was caught in images. There was no video at first until somebody sent us the footage later on, and the carriage companies put out a media release saying basically the horses were just lying down for a second, and then on the direction of the staff, they immediately rose back up and everything was fine,
Oh,
essentially. In the
just taking a
report,
nap. Just gonna take a nap now.
yeah, basically,
Ready to
it
all my gear and everything. All of
in
that.
the report that the BCSPCA or sorry, recommendations that the BCSPCA made to the city based on that incident, they actually called out the carriage company specifically for what they described as uh, kind of misleading the public. So in the words of the carriage company itself, they said, or the BCSBCA said, it is decidedly troubling that Victoria Carriage Tours chose to inappropriately downplay a serious incident which put the public at risk.
Mm.
So that was the words of the BCSPCA in their recommendations. And what happened was it kind of blew over, and then the video was sent to us and it contradicted what the carriage companies had said, which is kind of an ongoing theme of the carriage companies saying one thing and what actually happening being something else. And so from that, the SPCA moved forward with these recommendations, and of course it blew up. That video, I think it managed to get close to like 800,000 views between Facebook and YouTube, and probably otherwise probably 1 million views. So it went viral in a lot of ways, but unfortunately nothing changed because of it, despite all the recommendations and despite the public's response. City Council failed to take action.
And city council's responsibility is regarding the business license, I guess.
Yeah, so the city can regulate business. So that includes the business license, that includes the lease of the property to the carriage companies, and the city does also have the power to decide how animals can be treated or used within the city. So there actually is a bylaw on the books that says animals cannot be exploited for profit, which oddly enough is taking place. But it does make an exception for the riding of horses, which doesn't say, riding of horses, I feel like doesn't actually fall into the horse carriage category. It seems like two different things. And the showing of dogs and cats, I believe. So like, dog and cat shows effectively are still allowed, but it would restrict something like a circus or some other exhibition. And so we actually see sometimes shows come to town and they don't come to Victoria because they go to like UVic or somewhere in Saanich, because Victoria actually doesn't allow performances with animals to take place that are exploitative to them or cause them some harm. And what's odd about this is that I've tried to get a clear answer from the city whether they consider the horse carriage as a form of entertainment or not, but clearly it is, because it's tourism it's tourism, it's entertainment for tourists. It's not a mode of transportation that people use to get around anymore. So, and yet the city kind of just ignores their own bylaw when they, by allowing it to continue and not addressing it.
Mm. So you mentioned that something happened last year to sort of bring the issue to a head
Hmm.
between the people who are concerned about that animals and protecting their interests, and then the people who own the business of the carriages. What was that incident?
Uh, like last year with city council, yeah. So what happened was, effectively, uh, you know, there was enough councillors on council uh, who had said that they would support a motion to ban the horse carriages. So Councillor Isaac brought forward a motion that would have referred to staff for them to look into what, basically, could the city, the cost of the city doing it, just everything associated with what it would mean if the city did, move forward with a motion to have a ban of the horse carriages. Now, it was just a motion to have a conversation, to have staff look into it. It wasn't the motion to ban the horse carriages. So um, basically, the motion was passed at the committee of the whole, um, 5-4. And what happens is the council sort of pre-votes at committee of the whole, and then the next week at council, they kind of affirm that position. So between when the initial vote was taken and then the later vote, there was, of course, a huge, response from the tourism sector, the business community, other municipalities, the carriage companies and their supporters from all over the world, to try and stop council from even having this discussion, including the carriage companies threatening to sue the city for defamation just for having a conversation effectively um, about it, because they said it was injuring their business, their reputation, by this being talked about by council, which of course is ridiculous. So what ended up happening is one of the councillors, Laura Collins, who ended up running successfully for the NDP in the federal election, who had just been elected the fall before for city council through Together Victoria, she changed her vote, and she kind of did it. It was announced that she was going to be supporting the carriage company on CFAX, on the Adam Sterling show with Donna Freelander, the morning of the vote, and she didn't. Well, she gave a few reasons why, but nothing that clarified what. So she made a personal promise to me that she would support the motion when I spoke to her, and she abandoned that or reneged on that. So I was pretty heartbroken that somebody would do that, but um, that's that's the way politics
That,
is.
that is, and that's good to keep in mind. She's now our MP,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she sends us flyers and things. I get a flyer every now and then from the NDP asking what I would like them to do. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate
Yeah.
that we can't even have an examination of what has been going on, because that would then expose all of these concerns that have been raised with the SPCA over the years. And so it sounds like the people power is in documenting this is really something that we should all be thinking about. I know, if we happen to be out and we see something, that we all have our cameras with us. So that sounds like a good thing. And then they could send that documentation to the Victoria Carriage Tours. I'm wondering about other places in the world, Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
There's other cities have banned the carriages finally. They were a quaint, perhaps years ago when there were no cars or fewer cars. But a lot of cities now are saying, it's the time is up. So what is going on in other cities, and are you working with other groups that have had success in other cities?
Yeah, so last year, or at the beginning of this year, a ban came into effect in Montreal. So it had been basically phased out over kind of 2 years in Montreal, and effective, December 31st or January 1st, 2020, the horse carriages are no longer operating, which is fantastic, which was a huge success, and it's something that the mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, um, campaigned on, was that she would ban the horse carriages, and along with her team. And for a politician to follow through on their promises is, especially in terms of animal issues, is rare and greatly appreciated. And then, because to be, to make it perfectly clear, every councillor sitting right now, including Collins, who is left council to sit as an MP, uh, except for one, has at some point or another said that they would support a ban on the horse carriages, publicly and privately. So that they can't hold on to that uh, principle is, I think, concerning, and towards the influence that they have to face. The other um, city that recently banned horse carriages was Chicago, which is another major city in the U.S. to take this finally and run with it. They did a tremendous job down there, and again, they just were able to convince city council that it was the right thing to do. There was no specific accident that led to it. In Montreal, there was multiple horse deaths and horses collapsing in the street that led to uh, the public sentiment changing, and the ban being proposed and passed. But in Chicago, it was on principle, and some other cities have banned it on principle as well. And so what we see is, um, some cities do it for ethical reasons of, does this really reflect a modern city? Does this really reflect how we want people to uh, see our city, and or how we want the city to develop moving forward? Victoria seems to kind of be stuck in the past and in love with that kind of Victorian aesthetic, if you will, very colonial kind of aesthetic that the horse carriages are a part of, and they're not willing at this time to support it. Although I would say that the community is pretty divided, and I think that um, just as many, if not more, people support a ban on the horse carriages.
Yeah. Well, even before COVID, the plant-based movement was growing and growing exponentially. And now with COVID, I think a lot more people are becoming aware of the many, many reasons why animal agriculture, animals for food, and treating animals inhumanely in various different ways has led us to COVID, for one thing, and is not going to lead us to a sustainable future. So for those who are perhaps newly plant-based or newly vegan and are just starting to think about these other issues regarding animals, or or people who just are fed up with trying to drive around the carriages on the roads in James Bay, what can people do, Jordan? How do I know you do, you're doing some on the street demonstrations. Do you want people to get involved with that? Would you want them to go to City Hall? What can people do?
Yeah, I mean, people can certainly, if they're interested in joining, our peaceful demonstrations, then they're welcome to get in contact with us, and and participate in those. We definitely, I think, one of the most important things people can do, of course, is message mayor and council and let them know that they're opposed to the carriages, because there are continued campaigns by the carriage companies to try and sway council in their support. And there are a lot of powerful entities in the city that support the carriage companies, and so it's up to citizens to show those entities and the city that it's not something they want them to endorse. It's not something they want them to throw money behind. It's not something they want them to shape the city around. It's something that they want the city to phase out and to imagine a progressive city that doesn't exploit animals for profit in our city streets and doesn't ignore the numerous safety issues associated with that industry. um, uh, you know, there's just a very disturbing culture around the horse carriages right now that politically and economically through the tourism sector that I think people just aren't really aware of, and that it makes it a very difficult battle. So please, email City Council. There's a petition as well online, change.org petition. It's pretty easy to find, and people can sign and share that if they like. Although that's a smaller step.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess if all these small steps might add up to a better life for the horses. One final question before we go. What
Mhm.
happens to the horses when they're retired? Like, do you know how long they do this job, and then what happens to them once they're taken off the streets?
Yeah, so effectively, some of the horses are retired to the actual, the owner's farms and such, or their pasture, but the carriage companies always say that they can't sell horses, or that or sorry, not that they don't say that they can't sell horses. They say that they wouldn't sell them because they're like family to them, and that's of course a big thing that people always hang over our heads is like, well, if they're sold, they're just going to end up being sold to slaughter. If you shut them down, they're just going to go to slaughter. That's what everybody kind of says all the time as a fear mongering and threats about shutting down the industry. But the reality is that with the pandemic currently taking place, the carriage companies, and there's a video on our Facebook page about it, have sold and adopted out their horses. It's a number of their horses. So it's completely possible for them to find safe, loving homes for the horses by either selling them or adopting them out. It's just a matter of them having the will. And, the pandemic has shown that it can be done, so they can no longer use that as an argument saying that, what are we going to do with these horses? Well, you've shown us what you can do with these horses. There are creative opportunities there, and if they can't find a home for them, or are not willing to care for these animals that they've profited off of for many years, then they can surrender them to the BCSPCA. That's always an option, and the BCSPCA will do their best to find a safe long-term home for them as well.
A sanctuary home. Yeah, it's a similar argument, isn't it, when people say if we stop eating meat or flesh or eggs or whatever, then there's going to be all these wild domesticated animals roaming the
Yeah,
street. But they're bred into this world for the purpose of this exploitation or food for food or entertainment. I mean, they're purpose bred for that purpose. So once we stop using them in that way, then we don't have to worry about where they're all going to end up. Right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the reality is that when people say that, it's not like it's just going to happen tomorrow, right? The world isn't just going to go vegan tomorrow. It's going to take time, and so can you slowly reduce the number of animals you're producing to kill and slaughter over that time? Of course you can. Why don't you have a a target of like 70% reduction by 2025 or 2028, with the ultimate goal of 100% by 2030 or something like that. I mean, it's just not going to happen overnight, and there's not going to be cows roaming the streets and chickens taking over Beacon Hill Park or things like that. It's just not a reality.
Although it would be kind of fun in a
It'd be
way.
interesting, at least.
Like some of the videos we saw when everybody was inside at the beginnings of COVID, and the
Mm,
wild goats roaming the streets in Wales and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. If we want to get off oil and gas, we need a structured way of creating an alternative, energy source and that sort. It's a similar, exact same thing. We need to plan for it. And thank you for what you're doing to help us be aware of the concern, I think part of the thing is that, as you say, there it's part of the Victorian ambiance, right? And these poor creatures have been here for so long doing this job that we almost don't even see them anymore, I think, is part of it. And it's good that it's brought to our attention every now and then.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we can work on it. Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we go, Jordan?
They're trying to get people to email the city to stop us from being allowed to demonstrate in that area as well. So that's another thing people can email the city about is, you know, ensuring that the freedom for peaceful and respectful protest regarding the horse carriages is allowed to continue.
Well, and there is an email. It's counselors@victoria.ca. And you just write an email, send it to counselors@victoria.ca, and it goes to all the council and the mayor as well. So we can at least start by doing that. And then going to the Facebook group, Victoria Carriage Tours, and educating ourselves and getting involved where we can if we're concerned about the treatment of these creatures.
Yeah,
And if
the
you're
Victoria Horse Alliance. Sorry, you said Victoria Carriage
Sorry.
Tours.
Oh,
No, it's okay.
that's the other group.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
don't go to them.
we write to them as well, I suppose. Depends how you want to
Well,
approach it.
yeah, we encourage people not to go and to engage online or offline
Okay.
with them because it's just unnecessary. It's just how these kind of tensions rise. So, yeah.
Right, that's true. You're right. Okay, we'll stay with the high ground here. We'll go with Victoria Animal Alliance, Horse Alliance.
Victoria Horse Alliance.
Horse Alliance. There we go.
Yeah,
Victoria Horse Alliance online, and we'll do what we can and bring our cameras when we're downtown and see what we can collect, I guess. Okay. Well,
yeah,
thank you, Jordan, for taking the time today to talk about this and keep us posted, right?
yeah. Thanks so much, Janine. Really appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
You too.
Okay, bye.